Have you spent a significant amount of time living outside your passport country during your developmental years? Do you come from an expat, military, diplomat, missionary, or international business family background? If so, then this podcast is for you.
Welcome to the TCK Research Podcast, where we discuss the current state of research on third culture kids, cross-culture kids, expat families, and international life in general.
My name is Andrea Schmidt, and I've been an expat for over 30 years, having lived in a total of 9 countries. I'm a coach for TCK girls, and I'm currently completing my master's degree in psychology.
And I'm Mathieu Gagnon, an adult third culture kid who grew up in 6 countries until the age of 15. And I'm now a professor of psychology in Ontario, Canada.
Every episode, we bring you a fascinating conversation with a leading researcher in the field.
If you're listening on YouTube or another platform, please subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoy this episode, please press the thumbs up or like button, share it on your social media platforms, or send it to a friend.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can reach us at tckresearchpod@gmail.com.
Let's jump right in.
Enjoy the podcast.
Today's guests are Dr. Emma Marshall-Jones and Dr. Marnie Reed. Dr. Marshall-Jones is a Swiss-British clinical psychologist and federally accredited psychotherapist, currently working as senior social-emotional counselor at the International School of Basel. Dr. Marnie Reed is an Australian clinical psychologist and co-founder of Global Roots Consulting, a company providing evidence-based psychological support to the international community in Switzerland. Together, their work explores how internationally mobile young people and families navigate identity, belonging, well-being, and adjustment across cultures. And in this episode, we are talking about their 2023 paper entitled Stress, Mental Health, and Sociocultural Adjustment in Third Culture Kids, exploring the mediating roles of resilience and family functioning. Published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this new episode of the TCK Research Podcast. Hello, Emma. Hello, Marnie. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello.
Welcome.
Before we start, we have this thing we like to do where we basically say where we're calling in from. So I can start. I am calling in from Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Andrea, where are you calling in from?
Home, Cancun, Mexico. That's
Cancun,
where I'm
Mexico.
calling in from today, and I pass it over to
That it's
Emma.
home. Emma, where are you calling in from?
So I'm calling in from Basel, Switzerland.
Oh, I love Switzerland. Marnie.
And I'm there as well in Basel, Switzerland. We both live here. This is a wonderful room.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
All right. So thanks for coming on the podcast today. We always, before we start talking about the paper, we really like to have a sense of who the guest is, and especially in relation to this whole TCK expat experience. So what is your own TCK and or expatriate background story? And whoever wants to start can start.
Okay, I'll go. Is that all right with you, Marnie?
Go ahead.
Yep. So I guess it is relevant that our research talks about TCK and growing up as TCK because it's a subject that's dear to both Marnie and I because of our personal experiences. In my particular case, I have a Swiss mom and a British dad, and I grew up across continents, partly in Australia and then back in Europe, in France and Switzerland. I ended up settling down in France. I have a French husband, and my children are tri-national British, Swiss, and French. And now we settled down in Switzerland.
Right. So
Thanks
there's,
for
yeah,
sharing.
there is something there. There's a story there for sure.
Definitely.
What about you, Marnie?
So you can probably hear from my accent, I'm originally Australian.
Mhm.
And I left Australia as a teenager because my family relocated to the UK. And I lived there in London for 10 years. And then I met my husband. And then we started traveling together and we moved to Hong Kong, Singapore, and I have my two children in Singapore. And then
Yeah.
14 years ago, we moved to Switzerland and we're in the process of becoming Swiss,
Oh,
hopefully. Um, and so for me, and the funny thing is that Emma and I realized that we nearly overlapped in Melbourne as children. We were both at primary
no
school
way.
Oh, that's
right
crazy.
next
Oh,
to each
wow.
other in Melbourne.
I
And
love
then
that.
we met up at the University of Basel, working together in the Department for Clinical Psychology. Years later, discovering that link. So it's really amazing how paths.
Wow.
Wow,
Yeah.
what a coincidence or not.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
maybe not.
exactly. Who knows? Depends on your
It was
view of the
meant to be.
cosmos. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fantastic. Well,
thanks.
thank you for those wonderful answers. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for introducing yourselves and like yeah, now we have a good picture sort of where you've all been on the world map.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, if we go into your paper, at its root, it's about adjustment in third culture kids. And when you speak of adjustment, you really mean two things. Do you want to explain those two, please?
Yes, so I'll go. So indeed, when we talk about adjustment, we're really referring to a dual process.
Mhm.
And that process was initially defined by Searle and Ward in the 90s, and it's very commonly referred to in TCK literature. So the first process we address is psychological adjustment. So that's essentially mental health or internal well-being. So we're talking about emotional symptoms. We might mention anxiety or low mood, but we're not focusing in the paper on a specific diagnosis. We aimed it to be very broad and very much about mental health.
Mhm.
And the expression of mental health can be any behavioral difficulty, peer challenges. So we're essentially looking at the internal and the external factors that tell us how a young person is coping psychologically.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the second process within that dual understanding of adjustment is sociocultural adjustment.
Mhm.
And that's a more behavioral and contextual process. And it's about how the young person is functioning in their new environment. So, based on Marnie and my experience of supporting the expat families in the Basel region, we found it really necessary to go beyond the idea of a young person doing fine, because outwardly doing fine doesn't always mean doing fine internally, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So, for example, a child can appear socially adapted. They might have friends at school. They might be doing well at school, but internally they might feel disconnected or unsettled or anxious. So, for us, that distinction between psychological and sociocultural adjustment allowed us to look at that nuance and, in essence, not just a single outcome, but really making sure that our research reflected that layered and context dependent understanding of adjustment.
Yeah, that makes
Thank
sense.
you.
Yeah, kind of sort of multi-dimensional, more than one dimension. It's very interesting. Okay, so in your study, basically, you wanted to explore the relationship between this dual process of adjustment, as you just beautifully explained, and stress. And here again, you focused on two different aspects, conceptualizations of stress, perceived stress, and acculturative stress. What's the difference there? What should people understand about that difference?
Yeah, and I think for us in the beginning, when we started this project, we didn't realize so specifically the nuances of the different types of adjustment, different types of stress.
Mhm.
And we're both clinicians, so we'd seen this in practice. But when we
Mhm.
came to do the research project, we needed to really give it names and try to kind of pull apart the pieces so we could be very specific about what's influencing the kids. And so perceived stress is probably more what we think of as normal everyday stress. And it's linked to having an actual stressor. And it's very directly linked to resilience, which I think Emma's going to talk about soon,
Mhm.
because it's about the individual's perception of their ability to cope with the stress. And
Wow.
so, in the case of TCKs and also their families, it could be, for example, their perception of their ability to cope with making new friends, leaving old friends behind, leaving family, starting a new education system, or even a new sports club. And for
Mhm.
TCKs, that's extremely stressful. And when we spoke to parents, they reported things like, a new job, dealing with bureaucracy, finding a house, all of those things which are for
Mm.
very stressful. And when you put it together for the family, there are a lot of stresses involved.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And so the second part is acculturative stress, and this is a process that anyone migrating from one culture to another goes through.
Yeah.
And it results from the process of acculturation, which is when we're adapting from one culture into another. And it can occur due to loss of identity or through learning a new language, different cultural values, or even discrimination. And it can manifest, as Emma and I saw in the clinic, sometimes in anxiety disorders, stress, and also depression. So, both of these stress, we'd normally see these mixed together. But for the purpose of the research, we wanted to kind of pull them apart and see how they weight in terms of adjustment.
Very
Mm.
interesting. Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, so somebody could have very low stress in terms of you land somewhere, there's already a job for you, you already have a house, but there's that acculturative stress that is different somehow, qualitatively different from that. Very, very interesting.
And I think in terms of our population, this is the assumption that, their population with a lot of resources and good
Yeah, yeah.
jobs, and they're seen to kind of have everything, but still they suffer in some ways. And I think maybe it's these unseen things that we've
Hmm.
kind of highlighted in our study that could be partially underlying that.
Yeah.
Indeed,
And
indeed.
many expats experience this not only once, but multiple times,
Over and
right?
Mm.
over.
So it's over and over again, this
Yeah.
acculturation. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're talking about stress and the impact of stress, you say that the adjustment is it's not just direct, but it involves factors like resilience, mentioned that before, and also family function. So if we start with resilience, how do you refine resilience? And what role did you expect it to play in the link to stress and adjustment?
Yeah, so indeed, as Marnie suggested, we were very intentional about the way that we defined resilience, because resilience is a very used
Mm-hmm.
word, and we wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that we were talking about exactly our vision of what resilience was in our minds, but also what we wanted to measure. And so for that, we used Ungar's definition of resilience, which is not just a personality trait, something a child either has or doesn't have, but much more an adaptive process. And so the way that Ungar describes resilience is that it's a combination of internal abilities such as emotion regulation, flexibility, the ability to solve problems, but also, and interestingly, the ability to access and use resources in one's environment. And that's
Mm,
the interesting part. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
an input capacity, but it's also relational and contextual.
Mm-hmm.
mm.
So with that, and in our model, what we expected was to find, well, what we wanted to explore was whether resilience was a mediator between the stress factors that we were measuring and the outcomes that we were also measuring. So was it somewhere in the middle of that? And so rather than stress directly leading to poorer adjustment, we thought that stress might affect resilience, perhaps by lessening a young person's sense of external support or their capacity to deal with the situation, and in turn, that could be linked to poorer mental health outcomes. So, as such, we positioned resilience as a buffer in our model.
Right.
Not immunity to stress, but something that shapes how stress is then translated into well-being or adjustment.
I see. If I understand this correctly, then the idea is that you may help improve the situation by working on the resilience without necessarily removing the stress, because that resilience is that middle bridge that's borrowed from stress to adjustment. Very interesting.
100%. That's the desired outcome, right? Is that we
Yeah,
would have another place where we could input something that
yeah,
might not be the stress factors themselves or some more internalized perceptions of stress, but maybe we can input resilience strategies. So that was the
yeah,
initial kind
yeah.
of idea.
And
Especially
I like
since
the
sometimes you can't change the stress sometimes. Like
That's
the
exactly what I was
situation
going to
is what
say.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't remove
exactly.
it, but you can always work on helping people to have more resilience through
More
skills or
resilience.
resources.
Yeah.
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 But I like the definition that you chose for resilience. It's not only internal, but also from external factors. So
Yes, it's
there,
very
yeah,
interesting.
hope from the outside as well.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And another of these mediators, as I understood it, was also family functioning. So also playing that role of a bridge between stress, both types of stress and both kind of dimensions of adjustment, was family functioning. Now, when I say it, I get a sense that I would know what that is, but it also seems very broad. So what exactly should we
Yeah.
understand from family functioning?
Yeah. And I guess maybe I'll just say that we had a bigger data set as well that included parent data and child data. So this is
Oh,
one
interesting.
kind of
I
slice of
understood.
it. So sorry, my dog's just walked in the door.
Oh, that's okay. Animals are welcome on the TCK Research Podcast.
Yes, yes, they can give us
He
their
snores
input
very
as well.
loudly though, so I won't include him. But this was kind of, we had parent data and child data, and we wanted to collect some information about the family because initially all of this research was informed from Emma and I's clinical work and what we'd seen through the families. And so when we were doing this and we were thinking about adjustment and mental health in children, we really wanted to include some measure of how the family is doing. And so we used family functioning, and it typically includes different kind of skills or processes within a family. And so this would be, for example, cohesion or closeness within a family, communication, flexibility or adaptability, and also their rules or their roles. And so we thought for internationally mobile families, we predicted that there would be certain dimensions of family functioning that would be associated with more successful outcomes.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a family was more flexible or if they had closer bonds and they were more communicative, then we might expect that they have more positive adjustment. So that's why we
Yeah.
included this in the model.
That makes sense. And you can see the link with resilience too, right? Because I would think that part of a child's resilience uh, is also how their family deals with things from an
Yeah.
extended perspective. Like if it's an outside, these resources, this ability to use resources, as you were saying, Emma, one of your resources is your family.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Especially in expat life, right? Where
you move around so much, and the little nucleus is your
Yeah,
family.
sometimes it gives very tight families. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, you
very
already
interesting.
mentioned some of your participants. You mentioned adults, you mentioned kids. What can you tell us about your participants? How many did you have? Where did they come from? If you can go into a little bit more detail.
Yes, indeed. So we had a sample of 143 children and adolescents. So that's excluding the parents, because
Okay.
this study particularly focused on the children and children responses. So
Mm-hmm.
we did focus on those 143 children and adolescents between the ages of 7 and 17. And that age range was defined by the questionnaires that we were using. And so all of our participants had relocated internationally to Switzerland, the Basel region, and more broadly Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
um, and due to at least one of their parents' employment. So that was our criteria.
Okay.
And so these families were in internationally mobile context, and that's what we would traditionally, the traditional TCKs. So if you look at the multiple definitions of TCKs, this would be a very traditional TCK
Yeah,
sample.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so what we did is when we decided on the study, we reached out to international schools, local schools, multinational companies in Basel. There are many of those. And also we reached out to the City of Basel's Welcome Committee. And so
Mm.
through all of these kind of resources, we advertised the study. And importantly, one of our exclusion factors were that one of the parents was a Swiss national. And
Okay.
so we really were looking at genuine cross-cultural relocations.
So
Mm.
for listeners, just to make sure they understand, when you say an exclusion factor, you mean you didn't want one of the parents to be a Swiss national. Is that correct?
That's right. We really wanted
Correct. Yeah.
the children to be experiencing that acculturation. So if there
Yeah.
was a Swiss culture within their family, we assumed that probably they wouldn't be experiencing that acculturation.
Acculturative.
So we would
Mm.
then not include
Makes
those
sense.
people in the study.
Yeah, that makes
Interesting.
sense.
Yeah.
And so we had 50 nationalities represented within our sample,
That's
and
cool.
that's very much a picture of global mobility in Basel and around the world, most probably in Mexico and Canada as well.
Okay. Cool.
And yeah, we think that that diversity is important because TCK experiences themselves are diverse. So we're not looking at a single
Mhm.
population, we're looking at a very diverse population in itself.
Mhm.
Because, you know, cultural background, the languages, the prior mobility, all of those factors are very variable.
Mm.
So we hope that our sample really did represent the international families living in Basel for their employment, and more broadly, that we can assume that they're a good sample of TCK across the world as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
Is there a sense that Basel is a kind of like a hub for international families in Switzerland? I had no idea. Interesting.
It has
Very
the
interesting.
pharmaceutical industry here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh.
it also has the Bank of International Settlements, and
Oh, wow. Okay. I
all
had
of
no
these
idea.
companies, they rotate families, or they used to, less so now, but typically rotate families every 2 to 3 years. So there's a
Okay.
huge rotation of international.
Turnover. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay.
I had no idea. Cool. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you have these participants, this pool of participants, and of course, you have to start measuring these wonderful variables that you were talking about before, stress, adjustment, and so on. So, let's talk first about this dual process of adjustment, right? This idea of like on the one side, mental health, and on the other side, social cultural adjustment. How do you measure this? I'm assuming you don't just ask, how's your mental health or how adjusted are you? There are tools being used. What can you tell us about the tool that you use? And specifically, maybe for listeners, some sample questions, like if they were participating, what questions would they need to answer for you to measure their adjustments?
Yeah, so we used very well validated and reliable tools to measure this, and that's really important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to publish our
Yes.
results. And so, for the mental health, we used the 25-item strengths and difficulties questionnaire, the SDQ, which is a very well-known tool to use with children, and it's a parent-rated measure, or you can also have a teacher rated measure as well, but we use the parent one. And it has 5 subscales, and they include emotional symptoms, conduct problems, so that's related to behavior, hyperactivity and inattention, peer relationship problems, and pro-social behavior. So it has a whole mix of internal and external kind of measures for the child. And I'll give you some examples. So the parents rated how much they agree with these statements. So some of them would be, my child is often unhappy, downhearted, or uncheerful, and that's looking at emotional symptoms. Or on the other side, my child is kind to young children, and that looks, for example, at the pro-social behaviors.
Social. Yeah.
Yeah, so we got the parents to do this because we had a whole lot of different questionnaires. And for some of the younger children, especially, we didn't want to load them with too many questionnaires. So to ease that burden, we got the parents to kind of rate some of these. And we did the same for the sociocultural adjustment, which was the other outcome measure. And we got the parents to rate using a child version of the sociocultural adaptation scale by Ward and Kennedy. And it looks at the behavioral and cognitive factors in sociocultural adjustment, such as making friends or feeling settled in your home. And so again, the parents were rating certain statements, and I'll give you a few examples of these. So understanding jokes, following rules and regulations,
I see.
finding your way around.
That's very interesting.
And I think anyone who's moved can really relate to that. Like when you first move somewhere, you don't know what the jokes are, you don't know where things are. In Switzerland, we did a qualitative study here as well. And one of the very common things that came up was the regulations around rubbish disposal and recycling.
My goodness.
And anyone who's lived here might understand that
Yeah.
with a certain amount of stress in the beginning, because there's a lot of rules and it's great, very environmentally friendly, but in the beginning, it can be very stressful. So
Overwhelming, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
So
I
interesting.
have this memory of when we were in Switzerland in Bern, and a neighbor came to tell my dad that he was letting his motor run. My dad had just left the motor on for a few minutes. I think he was trying to warm up the car or something. You left your motor running, you can't. And I remember thinking, oh, it's very strict here, but in a good sense. It's like, yeah, this is good in a sense. You just made me think of that.
Yeah, it's a very,
Also
very
cultural
common
adjustment.
experience. Yeah.
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 Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so that was how you measured adjustment. What about stress? How did you measure perceived and acculturative stress? If you can tell us about the tools you use, and also a little bit, if you can give us an insight into the questions as well.
Yeah, sure. So as Marnie described when she was defining the different concepts of stress, we chose 2 questionnaires that would answer to that, right? So we had a questionnaire for perceived stress, which is the perceived stress scale for children, PSSC, and that was a child answered stress measure. And so it answers the question, how stressful does life feel for you overall? So very concrete, everyday questions about their internalized experience of stress, right? So I'll give you a few examples. We have, how often did you feel rushed or hurried? We have, how often did you feel worried about your grades? Or how often did you feel nervous? And it also includes items about support and whether their parents help them, their perception of being supported in
yes.
particular by their parents.
Hmm.
So this is the perceived stress. And
Yes.
then on the other side of that, we had the acculturative stress measure, which is the acculturative stress inventory for children, also very well recognized. It's called the ASIC for short by Suarez Morales. And this, as we said before, the acculturative stress is very much more specific to the relocation experience, how a young person might feel different or culturally out of place. So that's what this stress measure was meant to kind of measure.
To measure. Yeah.
And so the items would include things like I feel that others treat me differently because of my background, or I don't feel at home in this country. And we thought that that was quite a good way of measuring what we were seeing in the clinic. These are the kind of things that the children and teenagers that we would see in psychotherapy would tell us and share with us. I don't like it here, I don't feel at home. So that's really what we were trying to measure as well.
So you had a good mix of parents answering some questions and then children
answering others.
also answering others.
Yeah, as much as we could, yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so you were interested in the relationship between stress, both these two sides of stress, and adjustment, these two processes of adjustment. And you wondered if the relationship there was not direct, but rather passed through, depended on, in a sense, or affected resilience and family functioning. And then that would then have an impact on adjustment. So that means that on top of all the variables you just mentioned, you also needed to measure resilience and family functioning. So how did you measure resilience?
So we chose a tool that reflected our definition of resilience, which Emma explained earlier. And so we used here the child and youth resilience measure, which is a very well-researched, reliable, and valid tool. And it is a culturally sensitive tool, which measures resources in the community and not just the personality traits of a child. And so some examples of questions would be things like, do you share with people around you? Which shows the connection within the community. And it can be a smaller community or it could be a broader community. And so it's kind of the ideas, I think Emma said, of these layers of support that can build resilience. Some other items would be, do you think your friends care about you when things are difficult? Which shows the social support. And are you treated fairly? So this would be about how they feel in the bigger community. So it's a little bit different to maybe how we'd imagine traditional resilience tools.
As an inside trait, kind of. Yeah, you can see there from these questions that it's not an inside psychological trait. It's much broader than that.
Yeah, but I think more and more this kind of dual vision of resilience is more appropriate. Before we kind of thought that's a resilient child or that's a resilient person, and we attributed it to personality traits. But more and more we see that, you know, given the right support and resources, that even someone who's not maybe seen to be super resilient can actually flourish and succeed. So I think that's a much more empowering way to look at
so much more.
Empowering and more hopeful, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as Matthew mentioned before, so now we have to look at two things sort of influencing the outcome: resilience, which we just talked about, and family function. So the same question goes for that one as well. What did you use? And yeah, if you can give us some more examples. Lots of examples today.
It's very
I think
rich, content-rich
It's a
podcast.
very rich content. Yeah, very interesting.
But I think the examples really bring to life the kind of
Yeah.
aspects that we're
Indeed.
trying to measure.
Yeah.
So we used the McMaster Family Assessment Device, which is a very well-known tool for measuring family functioning. But we only used one subscale of it because it's quite an
Okay.
extensive tool, and we use the general functioning subscale of that.
What was
Um,
that? Sorry. What was it? Which one was that?
the
Which
general
subscale?
functioning
Okay.
subscale.
General
I didn't
functioning.
Sorry,
hear that. Yeah.
very quickly. They have a lot of different subscales, but we wanted a kind of an overview, a snapshot of the general functioning of the family. So again, we've got parents to rate these statements, and I'll give you a few examples of these. So in times of crisis, we can turn to each other for support, or we confide in each other. And I guess this looks at the cohesion and the communication. And maybe on the other side of things, when things get more strained, planning family activities is difficult because we misunderstand each other. And that would be another statement that looks, or there are lots of bad feelings in our family. And so we were looking to find, both the positive and the strengths of the families, but also the things that maybe they find difficult, like miscommunication or, family members who are struggling with emotional difficulties as well. So it gives us overall a sense of how the family system operates at kind of a dinner table level, what's going on in the family between the different measures. And as we know, relocation isn't just an individual stressor, but it affects the whole family system. And the parents are adjusting, and that impacts the kids. The kids are adjusting, that impacts each other. And so we wanted to look at the family dynamics, and especially because, as you mentioned before, Andrea, about the nuclear family, what happens when we remove the bigger support, and how does this family function?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic.
Interesting questions, I think, also for the parents to reflect on because sometimes you have those measurements where answers are very easy, you just go through them quickly. I'm sure that this one made them think. Yeah.
So that's a lot of measuring. That's a lot of variables. That's a lot of items, questions. That's a lot of measuring. Which means that you gathered a bunch of data, a whole lot of data. Now we're going to spare the viewers and listeners the statistics talk.
Yes, please.
So viewers and listeners are encouraged to imagine. Well, it's not just imagine; it's to realize that Emma and Marnie performed also all sorts of sophisticated statistical analyses, but we'll basically talk about the results in a more sort of simple way. So on to the results then. Let's maybe the first question, the simplest question. Did you find that stress, perceived stress and acculturative stress contributed to lower mental health and lower social cultural adjustment? Because that was sort of the basic assumption, right, behind your study. So did you see that pattern emerge from the data?
Yes, absolutely, we did. So what we did is that, so without going into details about the statistics, we draw a model of what we were looking for, right? So we had two models. And in our first model, we put perceived stress as a predictor. And then in our second model, we put acculturative stress, just for the sake of keeping those two things separate, right? And having the influence of those. And so for the first model with perceived stress, we had indeed a direct pathway there between perceived stress and sociocultural adjustment. We had another pathway with which was mediated by resilience, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But there was another pathway between perceived stress and mental health outcomes that was mediated by resilience. And in the second model, which was the one that was looking at acculturative stress as a predictor, we had two direct pathways that were not mediated, and we'll say more about that in a second, but we had two direct pathways between acculturative stress and mental health outcomes, and acculturative stress and sociocultural adjustment.
Okay. So stress matters, basically.
So stress matters.
That's what
Yeah.
we thought, and it does.
For both of the outcomes, right? For the mental health outcomes, but also for the adjustment outcomes. And that's
For the
that
adjustment
double-layered definition that we use. It really does make
Indeed. Very
And
interesting.
you already mentioned it, that resilience sort of played a role there.
Yes, quite meaningfully.
Yeah, especially with, if I understood this correctly, with perceived stress, right? Yeah.
That's right. So in our first model, the one that had the perceived stress as a predictor, there wasn't a direct outcome from a direct effect of perceived stress on mental health difficulties. So that's quite interesting, right?
Yeah,
Especially that we've said up until now. It was that resilience sat there somewhere in the middle, bridging that pathway between the perception of stress and the mental health outcomes. So that's a really interesting finding. No direct pathway, but a bridged pathway where resilience really sits there in the middle. And in our second model, it was also interesting. The findings were that, in fact, that we only had the very direct pathways between acculturative stress and the two outcomes that we were measuring. But we didn't find that there was a mediation there, either through resilience or via family functioning.
Family adjustment.
Yeah, very interesting.
So if we put that in everyday terms, would we agree to something like, in that case, stress had an impact on acculturative stress had an impact on adjustment, but it's not because it lowers resilience, and it's not because it impacts family functioning, let's say. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Acculturative stress on its own influences the mental health difficulties and the sociocultural adjustments. So it tells us that it's an important thing to look into, that acculturative stress matters. And resilience matters when it comes to dealing with the internalized perception of stress and the outcomes that might have on longer term outcomes in terms of mental health.
Yeah, and we just did the same movement, right? We just both went
The havening.
Yeah, the perceived stress. Yeah.
Okay, so and you partly answered that in your question, that family functioning didn't really seem to mediate or to play any sort of role there, right? Did it?
Well, yes and no. It doesn't stand out as a mediator in our model. However, we did measure in both the models, we did measure that there was an effect of family functioning on its own on mental health outcomes, which is what we expect.
Makes sense.
And in the other model, we measured the same thing, right? That there was that family functioning also affects mental health difficulties when we're starting with the predictor of acculturative stress. So wherever we start, it is that we do measure that the family functioning does affect the mental health outcomes. But maybe we could imagine this as a much bigger model, and that instead of being a mediator, it's just a factor that plays an important role without it being a mediation.
Yes, it's not a bridge, but it's a factor in itself, in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
But the thing is that in statistics we often look at significant influence, and so but it still has an influence.
Absolutely.
But not highly significant, at least not in your research.
Well, just not on that pathway, right?
Yeah, not on that pathway.
It wasn't a mediator, but it was a significant factor that influenced mental health and sociocultural adjustment. So that wasn't significant in the pathway where we were seeing that was a mediator. So it wasn't a mediator, but it was a significant factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's a and of course,
Yeah.
that's not surprising, right? All these factors are always kind of in complex relationships with each other, and depending on how you measure them and how you look at them and where you place them in the story, so to speak, they may play
Exactly.
a
And we were
different role.
trying
Yeah.
to we were trying to modelize this, but this was
Yeah.
like a first attempt at trying to have a model that might look like this, perhaps, it's our creativity. And perhaps there are more models or other models that could better explain it, but certainly these are our findings, and
Exactly.
probably other researchers will come and complete that with another heuristic at some point in
Yeah.
time.
Another way of
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
about the relationship. Yeah.
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 Okay.
What would be, according to you, the best next steps in this research area then?
I think Emma and I were trying to condense this answer into something. There's a lot.
I can imagine.
There's always a lot.
I think the main thing is we'd like to see research with larger sample sizes. I think this is an ongoing problem with TCK research.
Yeah.
Also with different TCK populations, so really kind of varied populations. Ours is very traditional, but we could also see research with diverse TCK populations. And I guess the biggest thing is longitudinal data.
Yeah.
And this is always the criticism, and a very valid one as well, that a lot of the TCK research is like a snapshot in time. And that to really understand adjustment, we need multiple time points to measure it. And so this would be, this would be a great study for anyone who has time and funding to do.
Emphasis on funding.
And I guess for us, our research was always aimed at trying to get away from just describing adjustment, but trying to inform support. And we wanted to take any of the findings that we had back to develop a more evidence-based clinical approach to work with TCKs in our family. So I think any research that informs really good support would also be great next steps.
When you use the word, I want to make sure people in the audience, there's no doubt you use the word longitudinal. And that means, if I understand correctly, that it would be best to follow children, TCKs, across maybe many years or maybe many months at least as they grow up, rather than measuring them once at one time. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, and it's hard to do with the population because they move so much.
They move,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I think for us,
yeah,
it would even be interesting to measure pre-relocation to see, how their stress changes throughout the whole process.
indeed.
But
True.
this takes a lot of planning, but ideally this would be what we should be aiming for in TCK research, to really understand adjustment.
Yes,
Yeah.
in much
Yeah,
of
absolutely
child
right.
development psychology, as a matter of fact, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so your research is interested as a piece of scholarship in itself. It stands in itself, but it can also go beyond there and say that there are implications that flow from that research. What do you think are some of the practical implications that come out of your paper? You're both clinicians. If I ask you to put your clinician hat on, not that you ever removed it, but what are some of the implications that come out of this?
Yeah, this was always in the forefront of our minds when we were doing the research.
Can you imagine?
How can we use with the population with whom we work? And I think we'd really like to put this knowledge into our clinical work by probably developing group setting programs so we can be more efficient, more effective than one-on-one. What we would see is when kids get to a clinical level of depression or anxiety or self-harm or something, then they get help. And what we would see is more group settings, skills-based training, prevention programs, education, also parent support groups. So we'd really like to integrate this on a bigger scale and not just one-on-one in our clinical work. And I work in a company now in Switzerland that I founded with one of the authors of the paper as well. And we're actively trying to do this at the moment.
Oh, how exciting.
Yes.
Yes, so you already putting this into practice, which is great.
Yeah, which was always there.
Yeah,
Indeed.
it's the best when you can take research into the real world, right?
Yes, that's important.
Yeah.
Emma,
Perfect.
did you want to
It's
add
important.
anything about the applications or implications?
No, I think that was one of the diagrams we had found was the clinical experience that should, in an ideal world, inspire research projects, and that the research projects should again
Feedback
inspire then improved clinical practice. So we hope to be well positioned in that diagram so that we did get inspired by our experience, and that we hope to bring some of those findings back into the way that we approach TCK. As Marnie was saying, potentially build those prevention programs and be out there before the mental health outcomes might appear as being detrimental to the child or the family as a system in itself.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of the researcher practitioner loop. Yeah.
Right.
It's wonderful. It's very important.
Good that the two of you combine both, right? I mean, there's nothing better than say as our research showed.
Yeah.
Nobody can argue with that. Thank you so much for your time, Emma and Marnie.
Thank
It
you,
was
both of you.
wonderful. We're so excited when we found your paper, and happy that you agreed to hopping onto our podcast together with us. It was lovely to meet you. And thank you
for having us.
Thank you for inviting us. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks to both of you. And to listeners and viewers, we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the TCK Research Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. Please subscribe, like, and share our podcast, and leave us a review. It really helps others find us. If you have any questions or comments, please write to us at tckresearchpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we promise we'll answer all emails. We wish you a good day wherever you are, and we hope you'll join us again for the next episode.